you have, whether you meant to or not, shown up in our session on community engagement and the neighbor way. And so our time together tonight is around exploring together what are good neighbor practices and things that will help make our missional endeavors more meaningful. So thank you already for sharing bits and pieces of your story and who you are. We knew it would be a feat to try to share a full introduction in our short amount of time that we have together tonight. I want you to be thinking about what makes a good neighbor. Hopefully nobody's too disgruntled with your neighbors tonight, but be thinking about what makes a good neighbor. We're gonna start this conversation engaging in the chat in a very personal way in just a few moments. And then we're going to move into some organizational ideas of good neighboring. And we do hope to break into breakout rooms tonight to talk a little bit contextually about good neighbor principles and practices using a tool that we want to share with you that we hope will help you to instigate and instigate new or meaningful missional endeavors in your community and evaluate the work that you're already doing. And how you might enhance that. So before we get too far into that, we do want to introduce ourselves to you just for a few moments. And again, thank you for sharing pieces of yourself in the chat. Brian, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Welcome, everybody. My name is Brian Mateer, and I'm the Director of Missional Engagement for the Western North Carolina Conference. And you can see my picture up there. That's my beautiful family, my wife, Amy, and my 4 daughters. We're grateful that you're here tonight. And for those of you that are just joining, if you would write your name, your church, and also one thing that you love about where you live in the chat.
So I'm Erin Burleson. In the picture you can see there, my husband of almost 22 years, his name is Sam, and we have been co-pastoring in Asheville at Covenant Community Church for the last almost 7 months and sharing an office. So we're figuring out how to do life-work balance at a whole new level. And you see my 2 children, Eliza, who's 2, Andrew, who's 7, and refuses to smile because that's apparently a part of being a 7-year-old is now you can decide if you want to smile for pictures or not. So this is a pretty authentic capture of our family. And this work, missional engagement, is what I'm passionate about. And what I've been fortunate to be able to do with Brian for the last 3.5 or, well, probably 4 years. And so what we're going to talk about tonight and the way that we're going to frame our conversation really comes out of our work together in a program in a community called the Missional Collective. Brian, do you want to share just for a moment about that, and then we will dive in?
Yeah, I'd love to. So the Missional Collective is, you'll see the tagline, a growing collective of Christian individuals and organizations that are cultivating lives of experiential neighboring. And we have a few different iterations of this, but we focus on immersive learning opportunities. So going to places and learning from people in places that are doing mission, leadership, justice, and another key component of our missional collective is the holistic personal transformation. So our current offerings are what we call the Missional Collective Journey. And it's a series of 5 retreats in various locations around the Western North Carolina Conference that last over a year, or through a year, I should say. We also have a church curriculum that is an 8-part series that is based upon these experiential neighboring principles that we have, and then we're developing and working on short-term student mission opportunities in Haywood County and in some other areas, and we're also working on some things for adults as well. So we take these same missional collective practices and integrate them into a week-long mission journey. So we would love to, talk with you if you have some interest in this. We'd love to talk with you personally about how you could get connected with either the church curriculum, the neighborhood experiential neighboring cohort, or the short-term student missions.
I dropped a link in the chat if anybody wants to follow there to the missionalcollective.info to learn a little bit more about that retreat. But let's go ahead and dive in a participatory way if you can. If you can turn on your cameras, that's great. But either way, if you can use your chat feature, I'd love to know what makes a good neighbor in the chat. Individually, your personal experience, you've lived long enough in a few places, you probably know some of the habits or the phrases or the experiences, the practices, the kind of conversations that have happened that make you go, man, we had some great neighbors back in the day. So go ahead and just drop those in the chat so we can kind of collectively put out our ideas of neighboring. I see thoughtfulness, friendliness, authentic care for those, for others, courtesy, friendly, speaking every day, leave their homes, watch out for your neighbors, genuine, real people, communication, people who are available, brings you a meal when you are sick. Yes, Ted. Share their stuff. Look out for each other while you're away. Boundaries with a willingness to cross privacy boundaries to build connection, a good balance there. Willing to watch kids at the last minute. Yes, and amen to that.
Yes. Yes.
Caring and compassionate. Fellowshipping together. These are great answers. Property protector. Love that. I always think about the person who will leash their dog. The person who will clean up their yard, especially when my kids want to play in it. Let your dogs out when you're stuck somewhere. Allowing your children or open to your children being in their yard. Carpooling or sharing rides. Great listeners. Those are amazing embodiments of what it means to be a good neighbor. And one of the things we want to think about is how our personal ideas of good neighboring might show up and shape our ideas of neighboring organizationally and collectively. And most of the time, it seems that we have this trend towards a little bit more of an individualistic way of showing up. Or a service and charity kind of way. We saw that a lot with the willing to let your dogs out, willing to watch your children, willing to share their resources with you. That's the service side of it, right? It's something that I'm willing to do for you, or you're willing to do for your neighbor, that will benefit them or me, or if we're lucky, it'll benefit both of us. The individualistic side of it is a little bit more the things that make the list, where we talk about what I do for me that may or may not benefit for you. For instance, I might keep my yard really clean and neat and beautifully landscaped, and I might not do it for anybody except for me and my own satisfaction and my own joy. And then it's a benefit to you by happenstance, not because of intentionality. And so pretty much the way we function is just what I'm doing for me that happens to benefit you, or what I'm doing for you that happens to benefit you or me or both of us, with a little bit more intentionality. And they're not bad, but they only go so far in making our interactions really meaningful. And so I want us to switch from our ideas of good neighbors to a Chinese proverb that you may be familiar with. And I'd like, if we have 3 people that are willing to unmute, I'd love for some other voices to show up in the space and just read a portion based on the color of this Chinese proverb that might shed some light on good ways to neighbor. So if somebody will, just 3 somebodies, unmute and read the first section, and then the next follow right after.
You want me to start first?
Yes, please.
Go to the people, live among them, learn from them, love them.
Start with what they know, build on what they have.
But of the best leaders, when their task is done, the people remark, we have done it ourselves.
Thank you so much. Some of you have heard this before. Some of you, this is the very first time, but I'm wondering, for those of you that are able, if you can find your annotate tool, it's either at the bottom or you can click on a view options. You're going to find a little button that says annotate. And if you can mark somewhere on this image with a stamp or any tool, I go to annotate and I hit stamp and I pick a little heart and just mark the word or phrase that really captures your attention, that's resonating with you when you think about what it means for us to be good neighbors. I see somebody selecting the live among them. I know this might take us a minute, but I think it'll be helpful. Somebody's circling love.
Yeah, that's great.
What else stands out? And if you can't find your annotation tool, you can drop it in the chat. That'll be fine. Go, live among them, love. We got a live, learn, love combination. I think that's gone pretty high in the marketing world, right? Live, learn, love, live, laugh, love, something like that. We have done it ourselves, is showing up in the chat. Thank you, Diane. Learn from them is coming from Tom. Build on what they have. Leaders, start with what they know, build on what they have. Again, these are really powerful concepts, and they sort of remind me, and feel free to keep marking the screen if you're figuring it out still. But they sort of remind me of the Jeremiah 29 scripture, verses 5-7 instead of 11, where there's a call for the people in exile to build houses and settle down and plant gardens and eat what they produce and marry and have sons and daughters and find wives and give and be given in marriage. And I think the way that text goes is seek the peace and the prosperity of the city, and pray, because if it prospers, then you too will prosper. And so that scripture really grounds us in this individual action that is connected to a communal impact, a willingness to live in all the good, the bad, and the ugly, and kind of work our way through it and be willing to show up again and again and again and learn and love and engage. I wonder if 2 or 3 of you can either raise your hand or we can try to unmute, but sometimes it gets sloppy. But I wonder if 2 or 3 of you might share, when you read this, what are some of the implications for your local church and your local community if we successfully did these things, if we went instead of asked people to come, if we lived amongst each other, really did life together, if we learned and loved and started with what people have and built on what they know and built on what they have. Michelle, I see your hand raised. What implications, what would this mean for you and for your community? I'm seeing Michelle Weaver's hand raised. If you'd like to speak, go ahead and just unmute.
Right. I forgot to unmute myself. I'm so sorry. I was speaking and didn't realize you didn't hear me. I've lived in Eden for 3 years now, and I love being part of this community. I've been taking classes at the senior center, and I love leading. Normally I lead the stretches at the senior center 2 days a week, but I'm taking these classes this week, and taking these classes is my way of giving back to the community, because I'm learning how to do a better job of helping out the community.
Yeah. So it helps you grow in your skills and your awareness of what's needed, right?
Absolutely.
Right. Thank you for sharing. Would somebody else like to share? And Brian, if you can see better than me, I would appreciate if you'd call on someone if you do.
I have my hand up. Margaret?
Go
Please
ahead,
share, Margaret. That'd be great.
Okay. I love learning about the diversity in our area, all of the different people, all of the different backgrounds. We have people of all different types of backgrounds, all different interests, and the interacting with all of the different people helps me learn and helps me expand in my personal understanding of people.
Great.
Yeah, that's great.
Awareness of the need is the first one, and awareness of the people that we serve. Thank you. Somebody else, maybe one more. What are the implications if we could neighbor in this way? going, living among, learning from, loving, starting, building, and giving other people the credit. I
I
see.
see Victoria's hand. Victoria, if you'll unmute and
Yes.
share. I think you're already unmuted.
Yes, I'm unmuted. Since I retired, I have been driving a school bus, and driving the school bus, I, meet all the children in middle school and high school. And the children now are a lot different than they were 40 years ago. A lot of the children don't have any respect. They say ugly words, but they don't do that on my bus. I'm the first person that they see in the mornings, and a lot of times they ask for food in the afternoons because they're hungry. So in my situation, I get to be their friend, but I'm still their bus driver, and they still have to have respect for me. So to me, that's a challenge, and I feel like, that it's a good thing to open the door for them, because there are some children that don't get to go to church. They don't have any community involvement. They don't have any fellowship like we do, and I can share some of the opportunities with them. And since I have been sharing those opportunities, I have gotten some of them involved in church.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. The power of relationships, right? If we actually show up in spaces in this way, we have a chance to really know people and to be in close relationship with them, where we have some influence and shaping in their lives and they in ours. And that, I don't know about for you, but for me, that gets me excited about ministry and missional engagement in the church. That's different than just doing a program or saying that we met a certain, that we did a certain activity and felt good about it. That's good too. But it takes us to a new role where we turn the needle from individualism and service-based neighboring and kind of how we see ourselves as individuals showing up, and we kind of just project on the church, to sort of leveling up, right? When we come together as the church, it's not just about our personal understandings and the simple things, though those are really meaningful. It's about the connection that we have to one another. And it's about the opportunity that we have to empower our community, to be empowered and to share in empowerment practices and principles, so that everybody feels the support and the love and the appreciation that you all described, that you love about where you live. And, when we talk about service, most of us can rattle off several ways in which we've served, things our churches have done. We have a list of projects maybe we want to do. We have photos and slideshows where we've celebrated our service projects and opportunities. But the idea of empowerment is a little bit more elusive. And so, we're kind of continuing to ask the question, how do we really engage in empowerment models of ministry? And there's a quote that I want to offer up tonight. There's a lot of differing ideas and views and definitions and simplifications of what empowerment is. But for tonight's purpose of trying to establish a neighborly way of being, I just want to offer this one that comes to us from the work of CCDA. If you're not familiar, that's the Christian Community Development Association. And they have a lot of wonderful resources and a network and an annual conference and things like that. But in their book, where they're focused in on this one principle of community development, the title is Empowerment, Mary Nelson writes that with this term, transformational community ministry. And so I think this is a great replacement word for empowerment, or interchangeable word with empowerment, that we're doing the work of transformational community ministry, which is the art and discipline of recognizing, developing, and calling forth the gifts, talents, and resources that God has already placed in the world for the benefit of all in the community. I don't know which word or phrase of this stands out to you, but for me, it's always this: already placed in the world. Wherever we show up, if it's 3 people or 3,000 people, there are already gifts and talents and strengths that we are called to recognize. And I love that he calls us to see it both as an art and a discipline. And the discipline part is the work that we've been trying to chip away at for the last few years. And I imagine many of you have been doing the same. So I want to drop in the chat, if I can here, this link for how we're going to spend the remainder of a good chunk of our time tonight. This is a tool that we've been using. And if you were on this category of a session in last year's winter leadership, we introduced it last year, but we've been really working with it over the last 12 months, a lot more. This is what we call the neighborhood scorecard. And we've used this because it helps us nurture this ideal, this quote that you see on the screen. This is like an ideal that we want to live into, but translating these concepts into everyday steps and actions gets really complicated. And so, we're like, how can we do this? How can we plan with empowerment in mind, or transformational community and ministry in mind? How can we evaluate what we're already doing and really get to the heart of, is it transformational? It might be fun, it might be meaningful even, but it's not always transformational. And that's a pretty significant shift for most of us to make a regular part of the conversation. So, go ahead if you want to and click on that link so that you can see it. I'm going to talk about it for a few minutes, and then we're going to try to go to our small groups or our breakout rooms. But what you see on this scorecard is 12 boxes, and they're really grouped in 4 levels. You see a layer for participants, which is comprised of mutuality, ownership, and freedom. These are kind of the concepts and principles that are associated with participants. And so when you're thinking about the work you do or the work that you hope to do in the community, this would be evaluating or planning either side of the work that you're doing with the participants lens, or with the or actually sharing with your participants, inviting them to give some feedback. Patricia, did you have a question? I see your hand is raised, and I just want to stop before I get too far.
I'm sorry, I just accidentally hit that.
That's fine. It's no problem at all. Okay, so I want you to think about, put yourself in the shoes of the participants or recipients or companions or whatever language you use, but also figure out ways that you can invite participants to engage around these principles. And when you get in your small groups, you're going to unpack them, because the second page of that scorecard that you see is actually give some definition. But so the first layer is participants. The second layer is around leaders. So this is who's planning, who's showing up in real time and leading or facilitating or executing the events, who are kind of the decision makers. And so you see these categories of leadership. And when you evaluate what you're doing from a leadership side, it's really asking questions around, how did they get to be the leader? Were they elected? Were they chosen? Were they appointed? Questions are conversation around, do we show up with an expert kind of hat on, or are we showing up in a shoulder to shoulder kind of way as guides instead of experts? And then the last category is, are our leaders giving and giving and giving and relieving every burden or problem or struggle, or is the leadership doing less instead of doing more, so that the people can sort of own their own journeys of whatever it is we're trying to do. So that's evaluating and planning from a leadership side. The next layer is the program itself, right? What are we building in? And questions around, is there educational opportunities formally? Are there training opportunities informally? Is there a way for people to, for it to be self-sustaining, or for individuals to become self-sustaining or make some kind of income? These are the types of things we can evaluate and plan for on a programmatic level. And then the last category is really the organization itself, which in my case is the church I'm a part of. I assume that's true for most of us. The organization as a whole, is there evidence of life planning, which means a more holistic approach? We're not just focusing on one piece. It's kind of a big conversation. Is there evidence of rights advocacy, like we're educating and empowering people to speak for themselves? And those kind of go with the programmatic pieces too. And is the entire thing infused with hope? Right? That's the distinctive of the church, is that we have the hope of Christ that infuses all of our missional engagement, all of our neighboring efforts. And so these are the 4 categories that we we have found helpful conversation points. Let me just stop and ask, does anybody have questions about the categories? I know you don't know all the concepts and, you know, it's going to take a minute, but any general questions? I'm just scrolling through to make sure I'm not skipping over you. Okay. So what I'd like to do, invite you to do, is to break into breakout rooms, and your room is going to be labeled either one of those 4 categories: participants, leaders, programs, or organizations. And when you get to the room, and I'll put this in a broadcast to your small group room. When you get to the room, what I'd love for you to do is just say hi to each other first, learn each other's names, but take a moment and just pick which icon is capturing your attention. No explanation needed, right? Maybe it's the keys for ownership, just capturing your attention. Just everybody take a moment just so you can make sure your mics are working. You're all, you know, in the space and in it to win it kind of thing. Share which icon is capturing you. And then together, use the link that's in the chat and you can read the definitions of what those words are. And just begin to talk about those 3 elements in your lane. You know, what's capturing my attention? Where have you seen these principles at work already in your ministry, in your churches, in your community? Where have you seen challenges trying to live into some of these? What difference would it make if you really committed? Those kind of questions. That's what I'm going to drop in the broadcast to your rooms. Okay. So, Brian, if you'll go ahead and start sending people to rooms, y'all just do your best to work together to try to define and discuss these. And we'll come back together and share a few thoughts. Welcome back. It looks like some of us made it back, about 73 out of, I think, 80 of us. So I apologize for anybody who got bumped off and came back on. Thank you for coming back and trying to stay engaged in what is always complex. I just want a real quick call for any thoughts or insights that came up in starting to unpack any of those squares or any of those categories. What came up for you all that was helpful, or what came up that was challenging when you think about these principles as ways to help hold us accountable and support us in our desire to be empowering?
Well, this is Vicki Brown, and I'm with your Rory District. And in our group, I have found out that it's a small world. It's a small world, you know, even with your neighbors on the other side of the community, you may have a lot of things in common. I went to a promised pajama thing, and we did Ubuntu. We did the Ubuntu game where we matched up the cards and matched up, you know, what we had in common. And Frances was in our group, Frances Marshall, and she only got like 55 seconds left before she got cut off because she somehow she didn't get in till later. But we're talking about a small world. She was talking about going to yard sales and things like that. And she said that she was in Stanley County. I was in Stanley County this morning because I was meeting up with the communications coordinator in our United Women of Faith group, and we met at the Goodie Shop. And so Frances was talking about some of the areas in there. So nice to meet you, Frances. I guess you're our neighbor on this Zoom call. And then Ted, which was a pastor that was in our group, he was talking about education and everything. And so it made me remember, you know, not a lot of things have changed as far as, you know, educating the children for, you know, what fellowship we do have available, what fellowship we do have available in the churches, because the children are not given an opportunity to learn more about scripture and to learn, you know, more about, you know, what we can do. So anyway, I thought it was a great session. If anybody else wants to add something.
Thank you so much for that. What?
Erin, this is Rod.
Hey, Rod.
I think with our group, we found that even though we were listed under programs, all of the other areas seem to overlap. There's some things like in the programs, from education to training to income, but then we were looking at freedom and how that impacts education, training, and income, and then how mutuality, works in it as well. And so we were just looking at how we might be able to take this approach as it relates to going out to doing community involvement, because a lot of times from the church perspective, we think we have the answers and then we go out and do, but maybe we need to go and sit and listen and then help bring in some mutuality, and so we can get some ownership, but then also where we can bring about education and training and then put some money in the game so that we're providing grants maybe that's going to help somebody to become more self-sustaining.
Great. That's a great summary of a lot of those categories. That one of those pieces kind of reminded me of a little part of the group I was in, and it was the recognition that if we're going to have some of these elements for something that we're ready to start, it may delay our start. What we thought we might be able to do 2 weeks from now, we might have to wait and do 2 months or even 2 years from now, if we really want to move in this model of kind of touching base on these principles and these elements. And so, that's the willingness to move beyond serving to empowering means we have to put ourselves or our timelines or our preferred status of completion sometimes on the back burner, because we're doing the work. It just is a lot more, well, to be honest, the work that we want to do is a lot more than we realize, right? If we really engage all these ways. So thank you for that. Our time is almost up, and I want to close with a slide in just a minute, but honestly, we've been asked to share a survey link with you before that. And so if you would, I'm dropping it in the chat right now. Just take a moment. I know we had some technical difficulties, but just take 3 minutes or so, click that link and complete the survey, because we know you will not want to do it when you get off here, and we understand. So if you would, and then we'll just have a closing thought. And if somebody who's doing the survey will tell me when you're done, that'll help me gauge how long it takes before I move us along.
I see someone put in the chat they've completed it. Erin, you're muted.
Y'all, we're 3 years into a pandemic, and somebody's still got to be muted when they're presenting. I just want to keep it real. As you're finishing that up, I just want to say thank you for the work that you're doing, however you're showing up in your communities. One of the other frames of reference that comes out of the empowerment book that I referenced earlier from the work of CCDA is these categories of understanding the church and the community. And so you may, like I do with our staff, sit down, and the next time you want to plan an event or an activity, put your event planning guide or notebook right next to your neighborhood scorecard. And whatever you're planning, say, where do we see evidence of these things in our planning? And then after the facts, when you evaluate, where do we see evidence of these things in the actual execution? And continue to challenge yourself to say, where are we strong and where do we need to learn and grow? So that hopefully we can live into the fullness of these in terms of the way our participants respond, the way that we as leaders show up and facilitate it, the way that the programming itself is structured and built, and the way that our organization as a whole might need to be shaped and morphed. And as we begin to do this work of really answering the question, not just what do we hope to do, what did we try to do, but how would our neighbors describe us, our church? How would our neighbors actually describe us, even after all of our best intentions? And hopefully we see a shift from just being a church in the community, which is like a fortress, beyond even just a church that's serving to the community, which is that savior kind of category, to becoming a church that is terrible. That is a church supposed to be in, to, and with the community, major typo, which is a partner. And the best thing we can be is a partner with our community, so that together we are empowered and the kingdom of God is expanded. Go forth, my friends, go among the people, live among the people, learn from them, love them, start with what they know, build on what they have, but of the best leaders, when their task is done, let the people remark, we have done it ourselves. If you'd like to join us for more of this conversation through our formalized retreats, which is the Neighbor Way, that image is what's on your screen, and we would love to hear from you via email. I'll send a follow-up email so that we can kind of engage and support you in your work. Any questions or comments before we go?
Is there a way we can print out this neighborhood scorecard?
Yes, I will put it also in the follow-up email. It'll take you back to this is on a Google Drive. So you should be able to just hit print from that when you receive it in the email if you're having trouble from the chat.
You can,
Okay,
I did it.
Somebody did it? Great.
Yeah, I did it.
Great. If you have questions about it, don't hesitate to reach out. I'd be happy to help you flesh it out and figure it out in your own context in days to come. But thank you all for being a part and for hanging with us. Have a wonderful evening.